Some rules are meant to be followed, but others are meant to be questioned. When a quiet confrontation unfolds in the middle of a busy terminal, what's the line between doing your job and doing what's right? Let us know in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe to follow more stories like this one that honor those who served. Eleanor Grant's ponytail was pulled so tight it gave her a slight headache, but that was the way she liked it. She believed in neat lines, crisp uniforms, and processes that didn't bend. At 28 years old, she was already lead gate agent at Terminal B, Gate 42 for Great Plains Regional Air. She was proud of it. While her peers in college were taking shots and skipping classes, Eleanor was working doubles at Midwestern Regional, soaking up every regulation, every protocol, until it lived under her skin. And now? She ran a clean gate. No boarding chaos, no stowaways, and absolutely no policy exceptions, especially not on an oversold flight bound for Charlotte. "Reboarding begins in 4 minutes," she said into the comm, her eyes scanning the list of passengers and flags. 2 missed check-ins, 1 wheelchair assist, 2 upgrades. No more wiggle room. That's when she saw him, moving slowly but with a kind of quiet discipline. James Carter, passenger 26, D. He wasn't out of place by appearance. Plaid button-down tucked into khakis, black cap pulled low over his brow. But his steps were precise, almost too balanced for someone his age. Something military about it. He had that careful stillness, the kind that isn't afraid of being overlooked, but makes you feel as if you're being observed instead. She watched him approach the podium. "Hi there," he said, voice gravelly but gentle. "I'm James Carter, Flight 327 to Charlotte." Eleanor checked the monitor. His ticket was there. Standard economy, middle seat. But there was a problem. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, your seat's been reallocated due to an overbooking. We can place you on the next available flight at 8:25 p.m. James didn't react, not the way most did. No huff, no sigh, just that same steady look. "I have a confirmation," he said calmly, pulling the printout from his breast pocket like a field report. "My granddaughter's graduation is tomorrow morning. She's valedictorian." Eleanor didn't soften, not because she didn't care, but because she couldn't. She had a flight manifest, a full plane, and no flexibility. "I understand, sir, but unfortunately, airline policy gives priority to confirm check-ins before the gate close. You weren't scanned in on time." James checked his watch. "It's 3:52. Flight boards at 4:00. We required check-in 45 minutes prior. You arrived 32 minutes ago." Something flickered behind his eyes, but only for a second. "Right," he said, folding the paper again. "Right." He didn't plead, didn't push, just turned and stepped aside, moving toward the window with the same soldier's rhythm. She'd seen angry passengers, entitled ones, crying teenagers, and self-important executives. But there was something in his silence that echoed louder than any tantrum. Michael Rivera saw it from his seat across the terminal. He wasn't in uniform anymore, not since leaving the Army after 2 tours in Ramadi. But you don't need a uniform to spot a fellow vet. There's a certain stillness in the way they wait, back to a wall, eyes scanning exits out of habit. Michael stood, slung his duffel over one shoulder, and approached slowly. "Sir?" he asked gently. "Are you okay?" James gave a brief nod. "Flight's full. No seat." Michael looked over at Eleanor, who was now boarding Group A with mechanical precision. "I saw you get here," Michael said. "You were ahead of me in security." "Doesn't matter," James said, almost smiling. "Not worth raising hell." "She's doing her job." Michael looked past him at the gate agent. Her name tag read Eleanor Grant. She was calling out names with brisk efficiency, polished, unshakable. "Sometimes the job needs reminding why it exists," Michael muttered. He walked toward her, unsure what he'd say until the words came out. "Excuse me," he said, voice just loud enough. "This man has a paid ticket and was here in time." Eleanor didn't flinch. Sir, I'm boarding a full flight. If you're not in this group—" "I'm not," Michael interrupted. "But I served in Iraq. That man, he walks like someone who served long before I did. And you're telling me the airline's procedure matters more than getting a grandfather to his granddaughter's graduation?" A few passengers were watching now, quiet but listening. "I don't make the policy," Eleanor replied coolly. "I enforce it." "That's the thing about policy," Michael said. "Sometimes it needs humanity to remind it why it exists." There was a pause, the kind that hangs heavy, even with overhead announcements in the background. Eleanor's eyes flicked between the crowd forming behind him, the screen in front of her, and the man by the window, who wasn't asking for anyone to fight for him, but who had someone doing it anyway. Then she heard a voice she wasn't expecting. "Ma'am, I'd like to speak with you." A woman in a blue pantsuit with a black FAA badge around her neck had stepped forward from the boarding crowd. And just like that, the temperature in the terminal shifted. Everyone stopped moving, and Eleanor's fingers froze over the keyboard. She didn't know it yet, but nothing about this day was going to stay ordinary. Eleanor's spine stiffened the moment she saw the badge. FAA. It was embossed into the laminate like a final word in a legal argument. The woman behind it was in her mid-40s, polished with a calm that felt earned, not worn like a mask. Her voice hadn't been loud, but it carried the kind of voice people listened to without knowing why. "Patricia Monroe," she said evenly, extending the badge toward Eleanor, but never offering a smile. "I'm with the FAA. I'm currently conducting unannounced gate assessments across multiple carriers." Eleanor's throat dried. She hadn't seen anything on the schedule. No alert? No memo? "Of course," she said, smoothing the panic from her face. "We follow all required guidelines to the letter. Can I help you with something specific?" Patricia turned slightly, just enough to glance at James Carter, who was still seated by the window, staring out over the tarmac with the kind of patience that felt biblical. She turned back to Eleanor. "I witnessed your interaction with that passenger," Patricia said. "And the one that followed." Eleanor's jaw tightened, just slightly. "Yes, ma'am. That gentleman's seat was reallocated due to late check-in per policy. We are at capacity. He will be rebooked on the next available flight." "And yet," Patricia said, gesturing subtly toward the group of boarding passengers, "you just bumped a traveler to first class due to a last-minute credit card upgrade, which opened a seat in coach, a middle seat." Eleanor blinked. That was true. She had processed it without thinking. The upgrade request had come through just before Group A began boarding. A man in a designer jacket, sunglasses indoors, talking on Bluetooth like he owned half the airline. She'd clicked confirm almost out of reflex. She hadn't thought of it as creating an opening, but Patricia had. "Technically, the upgrade was processed before Mr. Carter presented himself," Eleanor replied, reaching for safe ground. "He hadn't checked in yet at the kiosk." "He was in the terminal," Patricia said quietly, ahead of others, who've now boarded. Michael Rivera hadn't moved. He stood off to the side now, arms folded, watching the conversation with sharp eyes. Not aggressive, just ready. Eleanor shifted her weight. She could feel eyes on her. The traveling public, silent but alert. Even the gate screen seemed louder now, flickering between boarding instructions like a heartbeat that wouldn't calm. "Look," Eleanor said, lowering her voice. "I didn't mean to deny him anything. It's protocol. If I start making exceptions—" "You've already made one," Patricia said flatly. It wasn't accusatory, it was just fact, and that made it hit harder. Eleanor felt her chest tighten. She had always prided herself on fairness, but fairness in her world was rule-bound, measured in scans and time-stamps. She hadn't even really looked at James Carter's face, not until now, when he slowly turned back to observe them, his expression unreadable but steady. Patricia stepped forward. "May I have your passenger manifest?" Eleanor hesitated only a second before turning the screen slightly. Patricia scanned the list with clinical efficiency, then pointed. "Letter," she said. "Passenger 28B, upgraded. That opens 32E. It's unassigned." "Yes," Eleanor said carefully, "but it's in the last row. Most passengers decline." "He didn't decline. He wasn't offered," Patricia replied. Eleanor opened her mouth, then closed it again. Behind her, a voice broke the air. "Ma'am, I don't mind moving to that back seat." It was the man with the Bluetooth, standing a few feet away now. No sunglasses, no attitude, just an expression that was suddenly human. "I heard what's going on," he continued. "I got the upgrade for legroom, but I can manage. Let him take the seat." Eleanor blinked. Another ripple through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Was he military?" Someone else said, "Let the man fly." And someone near the snack bar started slow clapping before being shushed. Eleanor nodded quickly. "I can reassign. Give me one moment." She tapped the keyboard faster than necessary. The cursor moved like it was embarrassed, and within seconds, the seat 32E was assigned. "To Mr. James Carter," she announced, clearing her throat. "Boarding pass being printed now." She looked up. James hadn't moved yet, but Michael had. He turned, crossed to James, and said something quietly. Whatever it was made the older man smile, not wide, but enough to soften the hard lines of his face. James stood, gathered his canvas satchel, and approached the gate with a posture Eleanor now saw clearly for what it was. Military. Not rehearsed. Lived. Patricia watched him walk up. As he arrived at the gate, she stepped to the side and offered a respectful nod, not as an official, but as one citizen to another. James returned it, equally understated. As Eleanor handed him the boarding pass, she found herself saying, without even thinking, "Have a safe flight, Mr. Carter, and thank you for your service." He held her eyes for a moment, then nodded once. Much appreciated. He moved down the jet bridge without another word. Eleanor stood still for a moment, then sat slowly, as though the weight of the last 10 minutes had just hit her in the chest. Michael turned to go, but Patricia stopped him gently with a hand on his arm. "You knew?" she asked. "That he was military?" Michael gave a small smile. "You don't unlearn how to see it." And the way she spoke to him, it wasn't cruel, just indifferent. "Sometimes that's worse." Patricia nodded. "Sometimes, yes." Eleanor watched them go. She didn't feel ashamed, but something inside her had shifted. Quietly, profoundly. She'd followed protocol, but today, protocol hadn't been enough. And she wasn't sure it ever would be again. The plane hadn't even lifted off before Eleanor felt the change. Gate 42 looked no different. The chairs still squeaked, the monitors still hummed, but everything felt altered, like the world had taken one half-step left, and now nothing lined up the way it used to. Her clipboard was back in her hand, the flight boarded, the chaos contained. But her mind wasn't clearing. She should have felt satisfied, averted a PR nightmare, FAA oversight passed without incident, a flight rerouted for one man who, by all logic, shouldn't have made it on in the first place, but all she could hear in her head was his voice. Quiet, accepting, as if being overlooked was just another day he'd come to expect. That bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Michael Rivera had already left the gate, his duffel slung over his shoulder like a question she didn't want to answer. But Patricia Monroe hadn't left. She lingered like smoke after a controlled burn, her presence quiet but impossible to ignore. "You handled it better than most," Patricia said, her tone unreadable. Eleanor nodded, still straightening papers she didn't need to straighten. "I thought I was following the rules." "You were," Patricia said. "To a fault." That stung. Not because it was harsh, but because it was true. Eleanor looked up. "Do you know how often I've been told to just enforce?" she asked. Keep the line moving, don't get personal. If someone cries, offer a voucher. If they scream, call security. But never, ever stop the line." Patricia tilted her head slightly. "And how many times has that worked?" Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't have to. Patricia turned and took a few steps toward the terminal window, her shoes silent against the tile. "I've walked more airports than I care to count," she said. "Watched good people get chewed up because a policy was written in a room where no one had ever missed a funeral or a graduation." Eleanor hesitated, then stepped out from behind the podium. Was he really that invisible to me? Patricia didn't respond at first. She looked out the window toward the distant runway where Flight 327 was just a speck in the sky now. "No," she said finally. "You saw him. You just didn't look." The silence between them held. Down the concourse, another flight began boarding. An announcement droned overhead, emotionless and echoing. The spell almost broke. Then Patricia turned back. "You ever lose anyone?" she asked. "Military, I mean." Eleanor blinked. "My uncle. Navy. Died when I was 10. Submarine incident off Guam." "Then you know the weight they carry," Patricia said, "even when they don't show it." Eleanor nodded. "I do." Patricia stepped closer, folding her arms. Not coldly, but like someone settling in. "I joined the FAA after my brother came back from Afghanistan and couldn't get a job with the airlines. He was overqualified for everything, they said. Couldn't transition well. He took a job loading cargo, worked overnight shifts so he wouldn't scare the passengers." Eleanor listened, unsure where the story was going, but unwilling to interrupt. 2 years ago he was killed. Not in combat, not overseas. Crushed in a loading accident at a regional hub in Ohio. Patricia's voice never wavered. No one even noticed he was gone for 2 hours. Eleanor's stomach tightened. "I'm so sorry." Patricia gave a small nod, eyes distant. "Thank you. But here's the thing. The policies that failed him weren't written by monsters. They were written by people doing what you were trained to do. Keep it moving. Don't stop the machine." Eleanor looked down at the clipboard in her hand, the same kind they issued on her first day, the same kind that had made her feel powerful, necessary, safe. Now it felt like a shield made of paper. "I didn't want to be the bad guy," she said quietly. "You weren't," Patricia said. "You were the system that hurt worse." Patricia softened then. "Just enough. But you changed today. I saw it." "Because of him?" Eleanor asked. "Because someone reminded you of what matters more than rules." Eleanor exhaled slowly. She wasn't sure if it was shame or growth she was feeling, but it was heavy either way. Across the terminal, a little girl ran past holding a cardboard sign that said, "Welcome home, Daddy." The letters were crooked, the colors smeared. Eleanor didn't look away. Patricia followed her gaze, then turned back. "Let me ask you something," she said. "Do you think that man, James Carter, was surprised when you told him he couldn't board?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "No. He looked resigned." Patricia nodded. "Exactly. That's what breaks me every time. Not the outrage, the acceptance." She let the word settle. "Now don't let it sit right with you." Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small card. "If you ever want to transfer into compliance or advocacy or anything beyond this podium, call me. We need more people like you who've been on both sides of the counter." Eleanor took the card and studied it like it held weight. Maybe it did. Patricia started to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and one more thing." Eleanor looked up. "You can still be efficient," Patricia said. "Just don't forget to be human." Then she was gone. Eleanor stood alone at gate 42. The clipboard rested now on the podium, untouched. She looked out across the chairs, the monitors, the endless travelers in transit. And for the first time she saw them all. Not just passengers. People Charlotte's sunlight streamed through the wide windows of the arrival terminal, golden and quiet in the early evening hush. James Carter stepped off Flight 327 with his satchel tucked neatly under one arm, moving with the same deliberate gait he always had, one forged by jungle trails in Da Nang and decades of never rushing where rushing got men killed. The terminal smelled like coffee and linoleum. The gate was busy but not overwhelming, a soft buzz of reunions and small announcements. James looked around, scanning, not urgently but expectantly. His granddaughter's ceremony was at 10 o'clock a.m. and the next morning. He had made it. That was what mattered. And yet, it wasn't just about the time. He pulled the envelope from his jacket pocket and unfolded the photo inside, the one of Marissa in her cap and gown, standing between two palm trees in her college quad, smiling like someone who didn't yet know the world could ever be unfair. Her mother, James's daughter, had sent it with a note. She said she'd wait at arrivals for you. She's wearing the red dress. It didn't take long to spot her. Marissa stood on the other side of the security barrier, tall and radiant in a flowing red dress, holding a paper sign that said Grandpa James in thick black Sharpie. When their eyes met, her smile bloomed wide and real, and she waved the sign with both hands like it was a flag. He walked toward her, slow but steady, a lump forming in his throat before he could stop it. "Grandpa," she breathed as he stepped into her arms. He hugged her close, not with desperation, but with the kind of quiet intensity only distance and time could teach. She pulled back just enough to look at him, eyes bright. "I didn't think you'd make it," she whispered. "I didn't think I would either," he said, "but a couple people wouldn't take no for an answer." She tilted her head, curious. "You'll have to tell me that story." James smiled. "I will. But first, how've you been? Valedictorian?" Her cheeks flushed pink. "Nervous. But I'm glad you're here." They started walking, and as they passed a cafe kiosk in the terminal, James stopped. Something in the background caught his ear. A news feed on a nearby screen, silent captions rolling over brawl of an airport terminal. Not this one, Midwestern Regional, and there, for half a second, the frame paused on a shot of Gate 42. A woman stood behind the counter. Ponytail, crisp shirt, eyes locked on something off-screen. The caption read, "Unlikely Heroes. FAA Oversight Reveals Compassion Behind Policy." James chuckled. Marissa looked up at him, puzzled. "Just someone I owe a thank you to," he murmured. They reached the parking lot as the sky began to lavender, the warmth of the south sinking into his bones in a way he hadn't felt in years. Back in the terminal city, hundreds of miles away, Gate 42 was closing down for the night. Eleanor Grant stood behind the desk, her shift finally ending. The last flight had pushed back, the boarding signs went dark, and the monitors switched to night schedules. She tapped a few keys to log out, then reached into her pocket for the card Patricia Monroe had given her. She hadn't called yet, but the weight of it in her hand felt different now. Not pressure. Possibility. As she turned to leave, she saw Michael Rivera walking through the opposite corridor. He wasn't flying out, just passing through. Same duffel, same measured stride. Their eyes met across the tiled terminal. She gave a nod, small but real. He returned it, and that was enough. Out in the parking structure, James Carter leaned back in the passenger seat of Marissa's car, his eyes closed as she drove. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said softly. "Just thinking." "About what?" He opened his eyes slowly. "About how people think the world's all noise now. Phones, screens, everyone rushing past each other like ghosts. And then," he said, "someone slows down long enough to do something good, something decent, and suddenly you remember you're not invisible after all." Marissa reached over and gently squeezed his hand. The car rolled into the hotel roundabout, and she parked under the awning. He stepped out, the air warm against his face. Before she drove off, he paused and leaned down at the open window. "You're going to change things," he said. "I hope so." "No," he corrected. "You will. You've got that look." She laughed. "That's the same thing Mom says. She gets it from me." They exchanged one last smile before she pulled away into the evening traffic. Inside, James approached the front desk. A young man in a blazer greeted him. "Welcome to the Brookside Suite, sir." James Carter, "One night." "Ah, yes," the man said, tapping the keyboard. "Already prepaid. And a note was left with it. Would you like to read it?" James raised an eyebrow. "A note?" The clerk handed him a folded piece of hotel stationery. Inside, it read, "Sometimes the job needs humanity to remind it why it exists. Thank you for your patience." He stared at the initials for a long moment, then smiled. Later that night, James sat on the balcony of his room, the lights of Charlotte twinkling beneath a velvet sky. He thought about the girl behind the gate who'd started by denying him, the man who'd spoken up for him, and the woman from the FAA who saw everything no one else did. He took out the photo again. Larissa, grinning. He slipped it into the bedside drawer with a reverence he hadn't known he still possessed. Tomorrow would be her day, but tonight was his. He leaned back in the chair, the hum of the city below like a lullaby, and let himself be still. Not waiting, not surviving, just being. And for the first time in a long time, he slept through the night without once waking to check the time.